Thank you, Richard. You're much too kind, but that is your nice nature. I also want to give warm thanks, very much retrospectively, to Homi and Pirosha Randeria, whom I knew and who were the founders of this whole lecture series. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about a little-known Italian collector and collection. In the Piedmont Hills in northwest Italy, 14 kilometers west of Turin, lies the commune of Rivoli. The castle of Rivoli was the unfinished residence of the royal house of Savoy and now houses a museum of modern art. Close to the castle stands a white villa built in the 1960s by Francesco Federico Cerruti as a summer house for his parents. No one ever lived there. Francesco Federico Cerruti was born in Genoa on the 1st of January 1922. The son of Ines Castagneto and Giuseppe Cerruti, who worked for a Genovese bookbinder. In 1923, Giuseppe was sent to Turin to open a new branch of the bindery not far from the center. Here a daughter, Andreina, was born. Cerruti soon set up on his own, a family-run bindery, and in 1925, in partnership with another bindery, formed the Legatoria Industriale Torinese. There were a number of publishers in Turin, and the new telephone service proved to be of importance to the Cerruti bindery. The Legatoria Industriale Torinese survived the financial crash of 1929 and expanded and diversified. They worked for major publishers of art books, but also bound registers, letter books, sample books, and even produced some artistic bindings. The Cerruti children were involved in the bindery, and from an early age, Francesco Federico was exposed to the art books that were bound there. Both he and his sister grew up in an austere home devoted to hard work. They were very strictly brought up and used to a simple lifestyle, which Francesco maintained all his life. In 1934, the bindery got the exclusive contract to bind the telephone directories for most of Italy. The firm's production underwent technical change, using wire systems and introducing special machinery, such as sewing and folding machines. Since 1922, Italy had been governed by the National Fascist Party, with Mussolini as prime minister and dictator. His was a totalitarian regime where political opposition was crushed, but economic modernism was promoted. After the Nazi Party obtained power in Germany, Fascist Italy wanted to form an alliance with the new Nazi regime. In 1939, an alliance was established, and in the following year, Italy entered the war. During the war, Turin was heavily bombed, and between 1940 and 1945, there were over 100 raids targeting industrial plants, especially Fiat. Well over 2,000 inhabitants were killed in the bombing, and over half of all the buildings were destroyed, including the Cerruti bindery. Francesco, who before the war had been studying accountancy, completed his studies in 1940, and the next year, Andreina got her high school diploma. Both worked in the bindery. Francesco attended courses at the Faculty of Economics and Commerce till 1943, but the war prevented him from completing his degree. After the war, Turin was rapidly rebuilt, and the car industry played an important part in the Italian economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s. Giuseppe Cerruti set up a small workshop again and managed to install some new machinery, and by 1949, the Legatoria Industriale Torinese had again become a leading bindery. Again, they had obtained the contract for binding telephone directories. These were published in hardback until 1950, when revolutionary new technique, that of perfect binding, in Italian rilegatura al colla, glued binding, using vinyl adhesive, was introduced. In 1957, Francesco Federico was sent to the United States, where he obtained the patent for this technique. He also brought back the newest version of Harris binding machines, and production was increased to 200,000 volumes per day, transforming a family firm into a major bookbinding industry. Yellow Pages were launched, and the firm obtained a contract for binding these as well. These contracts continued until digitization and mobile phones were introduced, and in September 2013, the Legatoria Industriale Torinese had to close. Gradually, Francesco Federico took over the management of the bindery from his father. He was a reliable businessman with a strong work ethic and great organizational skills. But there was another side to this man, a lover and collector of art, a poet, and a searcher for perfection in a changing and changeable world. Not long after the White Villa in Rivoli was completed, in 1965, Francesco Federico started collecting art. The original Provençal style of the villa's interior was later changed to mostly 18th century decor and became the home of his art collection, art in a domestic setting. As well as paintings, ranging in date from the 14th to the 20th century, he collected sculpture, silver, ceramics, and books, illuminated manuscripts, and decorated book bindings. Most of his collection was acquired after his father's death in 1972. He bought from Turin galleries, at auctions, at Sotheby's and Christie's, at Drouot, and from antique dealers and gallery owners everywhere. He did definitely not buy for investment. When the Getty Museum came with a check of Disneyland proportions to try and buy a pair of allegorical paintings by Bertoni, the reply was, "What will I do with the money if I no longer have the Bertonis?" Francesco Federico was self-taught about art and art history. Through visiting exhibitions and art galleries, reading books and catalogues, he developed the eye of a connoisseur. He called himself an accountant and would be cross when he was called doctor or professor. "Accountant, you know I'm an accountant." He was a mixture of pride and stubborn awareness, with a touch of querulous modesty, but also with true humility. His voice was hesitant. Although he was diffident by nature, he did ask advice from gallery owners. After taking a long time to make up his mind, researching the history and provenance of each item, he made his own decision. According to one gallery owner, I quote, "He asked for advice, but then stubbornly made his own decisions." in order to stay friends, one day we decided we would not sell him anything further. It was as well that other gallery owners were less touchy. Francesco Federico, who during the week lived in a small flat close to the bindery, used to spend Sundays at the villa, which became a refuge where he could look at these works of art, which represented an untouchable perfection that could not be altered by disappointments triggered on a daily basis by people and their behavior. There, he was looked after by 2 caretakers who also helped him move objects around when he rearranged them according to his own specific but very private associations. He was a profoundly religious man, and many of his paintings are of religious subjects. He eschewed company, and access to the villa was a rare privilege reserved for a very few chosen art-loving friends. After he appointed Annalisa Polisello Ferrari, the daughter of a Venetian painter, as his assistant in 1983, the villa was opened twice a year, on New Year's Eve, for his birthday, and on his name day, on the 18th of July. He would be at the entrance, greeting a selected few, and would then disappear. She also went to auctions and dealers to inspect things Francesco Federico was interested in and to negotiate on his behalf. In 1993, a room-by-room manuscript inventory of the collection was compiled. It is clear from photographs that before that date, the collection was frequently rearranged. In February 2001, the Fondazione Francesco Federico Cerruti per l'Arte was founded to safeguard the integrity of the collection and its future public enjoyment. In the statute, Francesco himself says that his collection, I quote, has not been subject to chronological or geographical limitations and includes works of art from different periods and geographic origins, provided that they are characterized by the requirement of excellence, understood as the primary motivation for the coherence of the collection itself. The arrangement of the collection changed again before it was given to the Castello of Rivoli Museum of Modern Art for the purpose of the national and international community in order to perpetrate the values that inspire it. A photo of 2013 forms a reliable document of this last arrangement to, I quote, keep the collection just as I have always kept it, not modifying the display decisions I have made. And this is from Cerruti's will of April 2014. Francesco Federico died on the 15th of July 2015 after a long illness. When visiting the villa in which Cerruti's collection is housed, the wealth and diversity of paintings immediately jump out. The sculptures, mostly small ones, and the ceramics and porcelain also catch the eye. The books are less immediately obvious, but that is the case in many museums and country houses with important libraries. That does not mean that they meant less to the collector. Unlike those who collected books and bindings for their history, or for what they can reveal of the circumstances in which they were produced and read, Cerruti seems to have collected books as objects of art. The manuscripts in his collection are illuminated and pretty. The printed books are mostly fine copies, and the vast majority is in decorated bindings. The 20th century books are often limited editions with extra plates inserted in bindings designed by artists. Although the collection is international in scope, the emphasis is on French and Italian bindings, dating from the Renaissance onwards. There are Dutch atlases, bound in Amsterdam, and a sprinkling of German 16th century blind-tooled bindings, and one gold-tooled example. There are no English bindings. Cerruti must have had a reason for arranging the collection in what looks to us a rather haphazard way. His reasons for hanging certain paintings in certain rooms, the way in which he brought together paintings in different styles and from different periods, the combination of specific paintings with other objects of art, and the books with which he might have associated them seem very idiosyncratic. Now, I do not pretend to get into the mind of this highly private man, but I have tried to link the books and the bindings with some of the rooms and some of the paintings in a way that, at least for me, makes sense. Let's now visit the villa and look at his collection in situ, starting at the top. The tower room, paneled in dark wood, was devoted to early religious art. The only books here are those seen in this 15th century painting of St. Augustine by Sassetta. But I would like to associate this room with Cerruti's illuminated manuscripts. Not a major strength of the collection, but there are a few nice books of ours, such as this of Dominican use, written and decorated in Naples about 1480, bought from Jörg Günther, who sold him several of his illuminated manuscripts. A manuscript Titolo de Grandezza de España, granted by Philip V to Louis-Jean Charles de Talleyrand-Périgord, dated 1717, bound in yellow velvet with armorial devices, was bought from Surget in 2001. I think it would be more at home in the circular drawing room below the tower room, where the Batonis, which he refused to sell to the Getty Museum, are hung. Also on this floor is the music room, many times rearranged when new works of art were acquired. Here we find portraits of people holding books that I at least can link with bindings in the collection. This splendid portrait of 1540-41 by Il Pontormo shows a tall man holding a book in a plain binding, but with gilt and goffered edges. The Cerruti collection has a number of 16th century Italian bindings, more elaborately decorated than that of Pontormo's gentleman. Several were made in Venice. A copy of Dante's Commedia is in contemporary brown goatskin, tooled in gold with blind lines to an arabesque design with open and solid fleurons. It is sewn on 3 supports, showing as raised bands on the spine, alternating with 4 false bands, and has gilt and goffered edges. On the lower cover, the arms of the Venetian Tiepolo family. Contarenis de Magistratibus, in red-brown goatskin, tooled in gold to panel design with leaves, flowers, fleurons and roundels, has a 6-pointed star in the center, intersected by half-circular gouges. It was bound about 1551-55, possibly by the Mendoza binder, who was active in Venice from about 1535 to 1555, and about whom Anthony Hobson has written. Another Venetian binding, on Rime de Illustrissimi Signori Academici et Rei, dedicated to Cardinal Scipio Gonzaga, date from the late 16th century. It's made of brown goat skin, tooled in gold, with gouges, a variety of hatched tools, solid flower tools, a small dog, birds, and in the center, a tool of a burning vase. Its edges are gilt and goffered with a knot pattern, and although it is sewn on 3 supports, these do not show on the smooth spine, which you also see here. Both the decoration and the structure differ noticeably from the earlier Venetian examples. A binding made in Rome by Marcantonio Guilleri for Giovanni Battista Grimaldi, about 1545, on Virgil's opera, made of brown goat skin, tooled in gold, with gouges forming a border of interlacing ribbons, solid lotus tools and fleurons, has in the center a plaquette with the well-known Apollo and Pegasus device. That device was much disputed until the late Anthony Hobson put an end to all speculation by proving it to have been the device of Giovanni Battista Grimaldi, a Genovese patrician, rich and well-educated, who owned a large library estimated around 200 books. All Grimaldi's bindings with this device were made in Rome, but by 3 different binders who were booksellers as well. In Italy, in the 16th century, it was the norm for owners to have their books bound by or through the bookseller from whom they bought them. Marcantonio Guilleri was the son of a printer and himself an active bookseller as well as a binder. The tools used to decorate the bindings from his shop or from the shop of a binder he employed occur on books printed mainly between the mid-1540s and the mid-1560s. Cerruti bought this binding at Christie's in 2004 for £69,310. Another portrait in a music room of someone holding a book is of interest and triggers off a comparison. A painting by Bordone shows a German lady said to be of the Fugger family, holding a small book. This brings to mind a binding made in Venice about 1540 by the Fugger binder. Here's the lady, and here's the binding, also known as the Venetian apple binder, covering Petrarch's opera in dark brown goat skin, tooled in gold to a panel design with large curl tools in the corners of the panel, flower tools, rosettes, and fleurons. In the center, within a circle, is a blank shield, flanked by the initials VV, probably those of the original owner. This workshop, at work in Venice in the 1530s, 40s, and 50s, had a large and distinguished clientele. Although it was indeed patronized by Johann Jakob Fugger, a German banker and patron of arts and science, hence the name, members of several well-known Venetian families had their books bound there. Cardinal Granvelle was among his patrons, and so were collectors from abroad, such as Thomas Mailleux and Marc Laurin. There are 2 real books in this room. On the piano stool are 2 reference books. The right-hand one is about Marino Marini, a sculptor whose small sculpture of a horse and rider you can see on the round glass-topped table. On the same floor is the library, which was also Francesco Federico's study, paneled in dark wood with cases full of reference books, and in 2 cabinets and on the table a number of fine bindings. This is the right-hand side of the library when you come into it. In one of the cabinets, on the middle shelf, is a binding for Pierre Séguier, made in Paris by the Atelier Rocollet. Cerruti owned 3 bindings from this atelier, 2 of which have the painted arms of Pierre Séguier, Duc de Villemort, in the center. The first one covers a book of hours, printed in 1512, which you see here, and bound in 1645 in red goatskin. It is tooled in gold to a fanfare design with interlacing ribbons, solid and pointillé flower tools, pointillé curls, and 2 small profile pointillé heads. It was bound from Surget in 1997. The second covers a book written by Séguier's personal physician, Marin Curot de la Chambre, Discours sur les principes de chiromance. It was probably a presentation copy, bound about 1654, after Séguier got the Ordre de Saint-Esprit. Séguier came from a prominent legal family. He was keeper of the seals under Richelieu and Chancellor of France. His politico-legal career had its ups and downs. He was a man of great learning and a patron of literature. He amassed a valuable library consisting of about 34,000 volumes, including many Greek manuscripts. A third book in the Cerruti collection, On la vie la histoire des guerres civiles de France, is dedicated to Séguier. It was also bound in the Atelier Rocollet in gold-tooled red goatskin with Séguier's monogram, but a later onlay in the center shows the arms of an ecclesiastical member of the Valbec de Tourves family, and the earliest ecclesiastical members of that family date from the 18th century. Pierre Rocollet was a printer and bookseller, active from 1618 to 1662. He was not himself a binder, but he employed the same atelier. In a second wall cabinet, we see 3 18th century Paris mosaic bindings and a late 18th century embroidered binding. The mosaic binding on the bottom shelf looks remarkably like that on an Almanach Royal of 1760, bound in dark brown goatskin, with a narrow border onlayed in paler brown and with onlays of red, pale brown, and cream, forming a large floral design. Cerruti bought it for 30,000 French francs from Pierre Berès in 1971. Mosaic bindings of this kind, with large floral onlays, have been attributed both to Jacques Antoine and to Nicolas Denis de Rome. But as there are no identifiable tools, such attributions remain uncertain. The embroidered binding on the bottom shelf is one of the very few textile bindings in the collection. It covers a doctoral thesis on the Romano-German Empire by Ferguson Tepper, printed on parchment in Strasbourg in 1789, and dedicated by Tepper to Stanislas Augustus, King of Poland. It is bound in silver-white silk, embroidered in gold thread, colored silks and sequins, with a wide floral border and the arms of Stanislas II in the center. In the center of the lower cover, there is a vase with flowers on a bracket with swags and garlands. Stanislas Augustus Poniatowski, last king of Poland, a protégé of Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, was elected king in 1764. He was unable to stop the partition of Poland and abdicated in 1795. Back to the library. On the table, we can see a number of important French bindings. There are 2 bindings made for Grolier, 2 for Thomas Mailleux, and several others. A copy of Colonna Hypnerotomachia polyphily was bound by the fleur-de-lis binder in brown goatskin, tooled in gold with blind lines to a panel design with fleurons, gouges, solid lotus tools, and floral tools. On the upper cover are the title and Grolier's ownership inscription, Io Grolieri et Amicorum, while on the lower cover is his motto, Portio mea domino sit in terra viventium, Lord, may my portion be in the land of the living. The book is sewn on 6 alum-taught supports, showing as raised bands on the spine. These acta of the Council of Constance were bound about 15 or 20 years later by Grolier's last binder in brown calf, tooled in gold to an arabesque design with lines, gouges, and hatched tools around a large cartouche with the title on the upper cover and on the lower cover Grolier's motto. The upper cover has a smaller cartouche with Grolier's name et Amicorum. This book is sewn on 6 cords, but also showing as raised bands on the spine. The compartments were tooled later, probably in the 17th century. Jean Grolier was born in late 1489 or early 1490, the son of Etienne Grolier, a wealthy Lyonnese merchant. He had an Italian humanist as private tutor and attended the University of Paris. On his father's death in 1509, he became treasurer and receiver general of the Duchy of Milan, which had been conquered by the French in 1499, a post which he occupied twice. After the Battle of Pavia in 1525, he settled in Paris, where he spent the rest of his life. He became one of the treasurers of France, and from 1555 held various lucrative posts in the financial services of his country. He died in October 1565. He was an avid book collector. His early collection was acquired and bound in Milan. During his life in France, he used at least 17 different binders. The fleur-de-lis binder, who bound the Hypnerotomachia, which you see here the lower cover, was at work probably by 1536 and worked for Grolier between 1538 and 1540. Grolier patronized his last binder, who was responsible for the Council of Constance Acta, and again here you see the lower cover. He patronized this binder during the last 10 years of his life, during which this atelier bound 23 books for this remarkable collector. Also on the table in Cerruti's library are 2 bindings for Thomas Mailleux, secretary to Queen Catherine de' Medici. Cerruti owned 3 bindings made for this collector. This copy of Dionysius Halicarnassus was bound by Jean Picard in brown calf, tooled in gold with interlacing ribbons, forming a large cartouche decorated with black and white paint. The title is tooled in the center of the upper cover, with Mailleux's ownership inscription in the bottom frame. The lower cover shows his motto, In gratis servere nefas. It is an abomination to serve the ungrateful. The book is sewn on 7 recessed cords, leaving a smooth spine. A copy of Homer's Odyssey, bound by Comin Estienne in brown calf, tooled in gold with interlacing ribbons decorated with red, white, light brown and black paint, gouges and hatched tools, also has the book's title and Mailleux's ownership inscription on the upper cover, and Mailleux's In gratis motto on the lower. It too was sewn on recessed cords and has a smooth spine, tooled in gold with an all-over cross-hatched pattern. Like Grolier, Maillot used his Latin form of his name at amicorum. He knew Grolier in Paris and was influenced by him. He had his own considerable collection of books, bound by some of the same Paris ateliers that Grolier patronized. He used two monograms, a simple TDM and a more complex one. He also used two mottos, the In Gratis motto on the binding shown here, and later, Inimici mei mea mihi, non me mihi. My enemies have taken my goods from me, not my soul. Both sound like those of a disappointed or even an embittered man. He became conseiller secrétaire du roi in 1547, and 2 years later was appointed the first financial secretary to Queen Catherine de' Medici. He left the Queen's service about 1559, and in 1562 became secretary to the future Henri III. At the same time, he was appointed treasurer of France, a post which he lost in 1571 or 2. He was still alive in 1588. The tools used on the two bindings you have just seen were formerly attributed to Claude Pic. However, the solid tools formerly attributed to him have been shown to have belonged to Jean Picard, who worked between 1540 and 47, a bookseller and a binder. He was the Aldine representative in Paris, responsible to Grolier, who also used his services as a binder. He left in 1547, and from that date, Gomard Estienne was in charge of the atelier, followed in 1556 by Claude Pic. Bindings with mainly hedged tools, formerly attributed to Claude Pic, are now attributed to Gomard Estienne. In various documents dating between 1547 and 1556, he is called binder to the king or bookseller to the king. A third binding in the Cerruti collection was also bound for Maillot, but it is decorated entirely with lines and gouges and has no engraved finishing tools. It covers a trithemius in dark brown calf. Its smooth spine is tooled in gold with a double frame of lines. Maillot owned at least 30 bindings decorated with lines and gouges only, and as designs and styles are easily copied, attributions on the ground of style alone are too haphazard to be useful. Cerruti owned 3 French bindings from the library of an Italian collector. They were made in Paris by one of the binders who also worked for Thomas Wooton, Wooton's binder C, and who was active during the 1540s and 50s until at least 1563. They belonged to Paolo Giordano Orsini, Duke of Bracciano, Marquis of Anguilla. He came from a famous Roman family and was a nephew of Cardinal Sforza. He married Isabella de' Medici, the daughter of Cosimo I, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and impaled the Medici arms with his own. He was a distinguished soldier. All books known to have belonged to him were printed in Italy, but they were bound in Paris, and he probably acquired them when he visited France in 1556. Xenophon's Opera Morali, which you now see, is bound in dark brown goatskin, tooled in gold with interlacing ribbons and open tools. It has Orsini's arms in the center, surrounded by his name. Cerruti bought this binding from Surget in 1995 for 75,000 francs. During the same year, another binding for Orsini, bought from Surget, cost 175,000 francs. It's a copy of Appianus and also was bound by Wooton binder C in brown goatskin and tooled in gold with an intricate interlace open tools and 2 hedged tools decorated with black and silver paint. The third binding covers Bernardino Corio, Historio di Milano, in 10 goatskin, tooled in gold to a bold interlaced design with gouges, small open tools, decorated with dark brown, but it was probably black, and silver paint. It also has Orsini's arms in the center. The edges of all 3 books have been gilt and elaborately goffered. As you see on this slide, it's the edge of the book next to it. Although it seems a pity to leave the library, let us now go down to the ground floor, where there is a rectangular room with a small painting of the Ducal Palace in Venice by Guardi. And that painting makes me think of a Degalo issued by Pasquale Cicogna, Doge of Venice, to Hieronimo Bernardo, dated the 30th of July, 1592, a manuscript on parchment. And here you see the title page. It's bound in brown goatskin over double boards and decorated with red, black, and gold paint, showing on the upper cover the Lion of St. Mark, and on the lower, the somewhat damaged arms of the recipient. On the same floor is the dining room, with an abrupt change of mood. Here, reflected by many mirrors, we find several paintings by Cerruti's favorite painter, Giorgio de Chirico, a metaphysical painter, totally detached from the superficial stress of daily life. A self-portrait, dating from 1919, shows him holding a book to which he points. His shadow points to a factory outside. Might there be a parallel with Francesco Federico himself, the collector with the book, and the businessman with the factory? Against another wall in this room, the right-hand wall, on a chair beneath the Chirico painting, is a copy of Apollinaire Calligramme, Paris 1930, in a case binding in boards, with a cover design by the Chirico, who also made the lithographs illustrating the book. Cerruti had a number of very striking 20th century Parisian bindings. 2 were designed by Pierre Legrain. Legrain was a widely cultured man. He had studied art and designed dresses, jewelry, fabrics, and furniture. In 1916, having been invalided out of the army, he was looking for work and met Jacques Doucet, couturier, collector, and patron of the arts, who wanted a modern designer for the bindings in his collection, and asked Legrain to try his hand at this. Now, Legrain was not a binder, but he transformed binding design, breaking away from all that had been fashionable before. He used geometrical shapes and simple forms and all kinds of unconventional materials. He was inspired by typography and wanted the designs of his bindings to embody the spirit of the text. He asked several professional craftsmen to do the forwarding and finishing. Like Cerruti, he was interested in perfection. Paul Valéry, au crayon et au hasard, in olive green goatskin, is onlaid in black and tooled in gold and palladium to a design of geometrical shapes and circles. A watercolor depicting Valéry sitting in the train has been bound in. L'Auguste Daphne Chloé, bound in red goatskin with black goatskin onlays, is tooled in gold to a design of a grid with open roundels and roundels with dots. These designs, achieved with a ruler and compasses, were at the time not much appreciated by conventional binders. Marius Michel, a binder who himself broke away from tradition circa 1880, rejecting pastiche in favor of floral mosaics, revolted. I quote, "Where are we going now if a ruler and a pair of dividers are enough to make a decoration? Yes, where are we going?" A binder much influenced by Le Gras was Rose Adler. She too used abstract forms in a spirit of freedom of interpretation, but her work was less cubist and more natural. She used a great many colors and varieties of materials. Later, she broke away and developed her own style. Her designs are humorous and charming and full of imagination. This binding on Colette, l'Envers du Music-Hall, was bound in 1953 in cream calf and has multicolored onlays continuing over the edges of the boards. The smooth spine has a black onlay and is tooled in black and white. Many of her designs were executed by André Jeanne, who also co-signed her bindings. A designer who, unlike most of the Paris designer binders of this period, was trained as a binder, was Pierre-Lucien Martin. He studied at the École Technique Estienne and then worked for several binders. In 1940, he set up his own atelier, and after the Second World War, he branched out in more original work. He'd come away from copying earlier styles and started to develop and use geometrical shapes and juxtapositions of color and form, creating what looked like three-dimensional designs. As demand for his work grew, he employed different forwarders and finishers to carry out his actual binding. He considered the binding essentially an entry into the text and wanted to achieve a synthesis between the impact of the author and the style of the illustrator. Cerruti owned 4 bindings by him, the most striking of which covers Camus' La Peste, bound in 1970, in black calf with onlays of white calf and thicker onlays of black, white, and grey, to a geometrical trompe-l'œil design of cut-out receding tiles and windows. An earlier and far more colourful binding covers Carco Jésus Lacaille in tan goat skin with onlays of pink, purple, blue, and grey, and tooled in blind and gold to a design of ribbons and sharp lines. For Cerruti's most spectacular modern binding, we have to go down to the billiard room in the basement, the only room that was painted white. On the billiard table is Cerruti's copy of Proust à la recherche du temps perdu, bound in 13 volumes in blue goatskin, decorated to a design by Paul Bonnet, with tiny round inlaid dots in pink and tooled in gold to an irradiant design, slightly different on each volume. 8 autograph letters from Proust have been bound in. Paul Bonnet was a remarkably versatile designer. He was born in Paris, was apprenticed to an electrician, but being far more interested in art and design, he first became a dress designer and later started to design bindings, and by 1930 he had established himself as a leading binding designer using new techniques and materials such as sculpted and pierced leather. He employed various craftsmen to carry out his design, demanding technical virtuosity and precision. He could interpret the same book in different ways, but also used the same design a number of times. For example, he designed 28 bindings for Daudet Tartarin de Tarascon. This copy, bound in 1958, in very dark blue-black goatskin, has onlays of multicolored calf and is tooled in gold to a design of a large lion's mask. He used the lion's mask design a number of times, with slight variations, with or without stars, with more or fewer gold lines, and with onlays in different colors. Cerruti bought it at Sotheby's in 1996, and it has a paper pattern of the design inserted. A completely different effect was created in black goatskin, tooled in palladium, with elliptical onlays of calf in a harmony of grey and white, with small touches of color on the Montelin Morset Vita, bound in 1967. Although shy and shunning the company of others, Cerruti did promote culture, sending artworks to exhibitions and supporting exhibitions of bookbinding, all anonymously. For example, he lent this bonnet binding to an exhibition of bindings in private Piedmont collections organized in 1994 by Francesco Malaguzzi, prolific writer on decorated bindings in the Piedmont area. Besides his collection of books in fine bindings, Cerruti had a domestic library, all plainly bound. He owned monographs, exhibition catalogues, auction catalogues, annotated in his own hand, with figures comparing prices and converting estimates into European currency, the accountant at work. He had books relating to the history of art, but also more general history, especially local history. He owned books on the history of Savoy and Piedmont, books on Prince Eugene of Savoy, a great Turin hero, and texts relating to his birthplace, Genova. He also had texts relating to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies and an 18th century travel guide to Italy. More for relaxation, he also owned Italian poetry and had a reading copy of Proust à la recherche du temps perdu. Although Cerruti himself lived frugally and did not entertain on any great scale, there is next to the billiard room a wine cellar. A good place to end our visit, and from which we can go out and have a glass of wine in the room outside.